Welcome, everyone. My name is Jason Westcott. I'm a Principal PM Manager at Microsoft in the Cloud and AI Security Department.
And I'm Francesco Vigo from the Palo Alto Networks Technical Business Development Team. Thanks for sticking with us so late in the afternoon. We're going to talk about the application framework and the Microsoft Graph Security API and how they can work together to provide you better security. You've seen the keynotes in these days. You've seen how many vendors are there in the expo area. So there are lots of security products. And that's great because each one of them provides unique value to you. And they're all different. And it's great to have multiple products so you can actually get the best of the security from all these solutions. But there are problems when you have to actually implement all these products and solutions in your infrastructure. These problems can be the fact that the data is siloed, so you have lots of data in different silos, and it's not necessarily open or compatible from one to the other, so not all the products can leverage all the data. You have to manage the infrastructure to store all this data, to deploy sensors, to deploy enforcement points, so lots of work to actually deploy a new security solution. The policies that these solutions use are typically inconsistent. Each one of them is using some way to enforce, some way to act upon a threat. And they're different. And of course, putting all this together is hard. So when you actually want to put a system in place to investigate and respond, you have to do lots of things. So it's great to be able to have and choose and use lots of different security products, but it's really hard to do it in practice. So we think, both us and Microsoft, that we should simplify the consumption model. So you must be able to use all these security products, try them, use them, buy them, but you need to be able to do that in a simple way. This will allow you to test, deploy, and use new solutions quickly, get the value immediately, keep your existing investments so you don't have to deploy lots of different devices. You don't have to create silos of infrastructure for every single product. And simplify and automate the remediation process, so being able to leverage the information that all these solutions are able to unearth to actually provide better protection. So how do we simplify the consumption model? What can we do to do that? The idea, and again, we approach this in slightly different ways, and we will explain what this means, but the idea is using APIs. So instead of being closed systems and closed ecosystems, we want to be open. We want to provide APIs so our customers and our partners, third-party vendors, can actually interact with the APIs that Palo Alto Networks and Microsoft provide to access the security information. Can be logs, can be insights, can be threat intel, can be infrastructure information. So again, we approach these things differently, but the idea is to simplify the consumption model. You need a layer of APIs that allows third parties and customers to have open interaction with the security data. So let's have a look at how we do this.
Thanks, Francesco. So let's talk about the Microsoft Security API. So we released this at RSA about 3 weeks ago. And the idea behind the Security API stems from what we call the Microsoft Intelligent Security Graph. Now, the Security Graph is a story that started about 2015 when Satya, our CEO, first mentioned it at a government security conference. And the idea behind it is really that Microsoft has a tremendous aperture of what's happening out there on the internet. We have thousands of enterprise tenants out there with Office 365, millions of users of our consumer services. We've got just tremendous aperture out there. And all of this aperture leads to harvesting a great amount of signal about the bad things that are happening out on the internet today. So what does the Intelligent Security Graph kind of look like if you break it down into parts? The first part is this threat intelligence that we harvest from the signal that we just talked about. So we've got a system inside the company known as Interflow that is the repository for all of this information. all of our security products at the company tap into Interflow and harvest that information when they're trying to evaluate whether something is bad or not. Which leads to the second point, which is about the analytics. So each of the products has a specialty area. We've got CASB solutions, EDR solutions, user-based behavior solutions. Obviously, each one of these has a niche of what it's very good at. And all of them have, of course, the latest and greatest of threat intelligence and advanced analytics that we have multiple teams working on constantly. So we're trying to really transition people away from feeling the need to have raw log data. For the most part, we want the products themselves that are experts at this to be able to pore over the logs and come up with the insights on your behalf. But the last part of the Intelligent Security Graph story is really about connected systems, and that's where the security API comes in that we're going to talk about today. So the connected systems is really trying to solve some integration challenges. This is really an integration story, a story about it being very painful today to deploy a new security solution into a large enterprise. And so some of the challenges that people have when we talk to them is about disconnected alerts. So obviously, lots of different security products. Each one has its own specialty, as we talked about. Very good at what they do, but they emit their alerts in a different schema. They provide them in a different database. A lot of work goes into getting those disconnected alerts into a common system that people work with. There's also a lack of context. When people work with security alerts today, one of the first things they need to do is figure out more information about the entities that are involved in that alert. If you've got a server, maybe it's server 25, I don't know anything about that server as an investigator. Where do I find the information for that server? It's usually found in other systems besides my security system. It's not found in my SIEM system. Typically, I have to go out to some kind of other infrastructure to find out more of this context. Same thing for users, same thing for files, IPs, all sorts of stuff. Lives in various disparate places. And the last, of course, is operational complexity. If you think about the life of a security operations person, they don't have the ability to do a lot of the things that they really need to do. Things as simple as responding and taking a remediation action as simple as resetting someone's password. Even at Microsoft today, if they're working on my account and they think Jason's account might be compromised, they have to go to the identity management team, cut a ticket, get that fulfilled. So this kind of latency is added to all of these processes, and it adds a lot of frustration for the service operations people, and it's really, really unnecessary. So let's talk about the security API and what it's going to do. The first thing it's going to do is standardize alert management. So through this API, when you connect to the API, it's a REST endpoint, all the alerts that come through this API are going to be in the exact same schema. It's a very rich schema with very stateful information about the users, hosts, files that are part of the alerts. And it doesn't matter what product it comes from, it's going to be part of that same schema. So correlating the data is going to be very, very easy. The other problem that we're trying to address with this API around alert lifecycle management is that right now we've got lots of different panes of glass in your world. I mean, typically what happens is people harvest alerts from various systems, they pull them into another system, and they'll work with those alerts there. They'll maybe cut a ticket, they'll assign that ticket to somebody, mark it as true positive, false positive, what have you. Meanwhile, somebody else in the company is back looking at the portal from where the alert originally came from, and it still shows new, still shows bright red, never been looked at before. This kind of dissonance is something that all the companies that we talk to are struggling with. It's a very simple thing, but this API, it's a writable API too. It's not just about getting data out of it. So we're working with vendors who deal with ticketing systems and alerting to be able to just push back notifications to this API that says this has been assigned to somebody, or the state of this alert has changed, so that all your panes of glass are now going to be in sync with each other. Anybody who knows about that particular alert is going to have the same status for that alert. The second pillar is around unlocking the context to drive investigations. I touched on this a little bit as a pain point. How are we going to solve this with the API? So we're instituting a new type of entity in our API. It's all about security inventory. If you think about the security products that are out there, they know a whole lot of information about one or more types of entities. An EDR solution knows a ton about endpoints. It knows what files are on those endpoints. It knows who's logged into those endpoints in the last X amount of days. User behavior systems know a lot about accounts. They know where they've logged on. They know what kinds of things they're doing, what files they've accessed. They know what other accounts are associated with the primary account. If you're a box user, if you use Google Cloud, what have you, all those accounts are correlated together. So security systems know a lot about these inventory pieces. We're going to expose those in the API so that when you're coding an application that deals with alerts, and the first thing somebody wants to know is more information about the entities in that alert, it's a simple callback to the API to say, give me everything you know about that user or everything you know about that particular file. The last thing is around automation. So in addition to dealing with alerts, both consuming alerts and writing back and patching the state of alerts, and dealing with security inventory, we're going to be exposing two other areas in the API. The first is around actions. So automating things is pretty difficult today. There's companies downstairs right now that built their entire business upon trying to make life easier for you, the customer, around automation. They spend their whole day integrating with hundreds of different APIs because this is difficult. What we're going to do is we're going to stand up a standardized way of doing actions for everybody behind the security API. What that means is that it's going to be very, very simple to build an application that not only deals with alerts, but remediates those alerts as well. And the last is around configuration changes. So security systems have a lot of policy-based configurations, a lot of other configurations around just the management of the service itself. All of those configuration settings are going to be available through this API as well. So we talk a lot about the intelligent security graph as a story. We talk a lot about the security API as a specific thing. There's sometimes introduces some confusion. So we have this simple slide that talks about what it is and what it isn't. It is a REST API, a single REST API for the company, and a uniform schema for the way we talk about alerts, the way we deal with actions, the way we talk about inventory, all nice and uniform. It's a gateway to Microsoft and partner services. I haven't really touched on this yet, but you'll see this in the next slide. One of the interesting and novel things we're doing with this, in the spirit of openness, is this API is going to be available for any provider. So we've already been working with Palo Alto Networks, of course. Those products are going to be in this API, behind this API, just like any other Microsoft product. So as a customer, you know, there's no customer out there in the world that's 100% Microsoft shop when it comes to security. It just doesn't happen. You know, we have pretty much everybody we talk to is also a Palo Alto customer. For those types of people, they can access this single API as their integration point, and they'll be able to talk to all the Microsoft products. They'll be able to talk to Palo Alto products and all the other security providers that we're going to invite to participate. So the other thing is it's available at no extra cost. Basically, you license the products, be they Microsoft products or be they third-party products, and you can use the API to access. What it is not a raw log system. So this API is about delivering insights. It's about the security products that pore over those raw logs and make determination of what's bad and what's good, and putting those insights and making those insights available to you. It's not about connecting to this REST API and trying to harvest out every single raw log from your cloud systems. It's not a threat intel feed. You cannot use this API to connect and pull out all of Microsoft's threat intelligence. We are working on a partnership with Palo Alto to do some work with threat intelligence, but to date, Microsoft has never made its threat intelligence available for anybody to consume, and it's still going to hold true through this API. We're not building a UI. Clearly, a UI could be built on top of this very easily, and it's not to say that there won't be a part of Microsoft that does that, but it's certainly not going to be my team. And of course, we're encouraging third parties to use this API to augment their existing UIs. And it's not a SIEM system. So here's a little architecture slide that kind of describes what it is. It is part of the Microsoft Graph. So the Microsoft Graph is Microsoft's one API surface to interact with all of our products and services. It's been around for about 2 or 3 years, and it's expanding all the time. Again, we just introduced the security elements to it a few weeks ago at RSA. But again, it's constantly evolving and constantly increasing. This is the future direction of Microsoft's APIs. So you can take a bet that the stuff that we're putting in here today is going to be around for a long, long time. So you can see the types of entities we're introducing. Alerts, these things called security profiles, which are our inventory items, many different kinds, hosts, users, etc. You can see the actions and configurations that I spoke about. These are all new entity types in the Microsoft Graph. The cool thing about it is connecting to this API, you can work with these entities, but you're also connecting to the same API that hosts all of this other metadata about your company. So for example, if you're working with an application that deals with security alerts and you're investigating Jason's account, like we talked about earlier, one of the things I can do is find out what documents Jason's been accessing lately. I can find out who Jason works with most often. All of this metadata is available in the same API. So things that you don't normally associate with a pure security app, I think you're going to see an evolution there in the types of scenarios people are developing and experiences people are providing to you by building upon this API. The top layer is really important. This is all of the products and services that are behind this API. So you can see the Microsoft services, of course, but the third-party ecosystem partners is really what we're here to talk about today. Of course, Palo Alto Networks, one of the best people we've been working with, they are building a provider that sits exactly on par with all the Microsoft products. There is no difference. There's no preferential treatment. You connect to this API, you talk to Palo Alto the same way you talk to Windows Defender ATP. We use standard OAuth protocols for the Microsoft Graph. You have to get consent to your application to talk to it. You have to be in a certain role if you're using user-delegated authority. And we have lots of different sample codes and SDKs out there already available today. So lots of good stuff. What can you build with this? Well, the sky's the limit. Like I said, it's not just about building pure security applications, although obviously based on the type of entities we talked about, it's easy to see the kinds of things that would be easy to build, dashboards, workflow automation systems, threat protection. But also think about non-security applications. Like there's lots of things that you could have that are productivity applications that could actually tap into this API and pull in some security data that normally wouldn't really be thought of, but because you're connecting to the same API that you're connecting for productivity apps, you have access to a lot of different types of data. So Francesco is now going to talk about the application framework.
Thanks, Jason. So I think you heard about the application framework these days. This architecture slide on what we provide today. Actually, it's not GA yet, but what we will provide soon. As you can see in the bottom, all the network security information from our firewalls, the endpoint information from Traps, cloud information from Aperture is being sent to our data lake through a service called the login service. So again, we collect and we provide a place where you as a customer can store lots of security-related information from Palo Alto Networks. And through the application framework API, customer applications or partners can access that information if you give them consent to. So as a customer, you can decide that you can give partner A, partner B, or partner C access to your data. And through the logging event and directory service, they can query the data, find the information they need, extract insights, and provide the value that their solution is meant to give you without having to deploy an infrastructure, manage the infrastructure. It's all a cloud-to-cloud integration. And when it comes to the use cases that you can achieve with the application framework, again, as Jason said, with the Graph Security API, sky is the limit. We started a few months back working with partners, with our early partners, with some ideas. And a few weeks later, we are here. We have 30+ partners that are downstairs presenting their integrations. And we didn't even realize that some of these applications were possible. And there will be more coming in the future because, again, once you get access to the data, each one of the vendors can provide their own value, and customers will be able to build their own application to extract the information they really want. We have, again, lots of use cases. We have threat intel vendors like Recorded Future that can provide enrichment information around threat intel. We have security orchestration solutions like ServiceNow that can look at our logs to enhance the information they know about security incidents, and you can trigger remediation flows from that. We have identity vendors like Silverfort. By the way, I'm mentioning all the folks in the room. That can actually look at our logs and change the authentication profile of a user to, for example, force MFA if a user did something wrong. So these are just some of the use cases. We have partners that are doing cool visualization and analytics of the data, machine learning, lots of use cases around Internet of Things security. We really don't know where this will end in terms of use cases. And again, all these partner solutions can plug to the application framework to leverage our data. So that being said, how do the application framework and the Graph Security API work together? We have APIs. Microsoft has APIs. How can we extract value out of this integration? The first thing we do is creating a provider, a Palo Alto Networks provider for the Graph Security API that is able to communicate with the application framework. This means that, as Jason mentioned, you can query the Graph Security API, and you can get information by running queries against the application framework using the Graph Security API. And I will show some examples of that. So when you give consent, you go to the Palo Alto Networks application portal, and you enable the Palo Alto Networks provider for the Graph Security API, then you are allowing any application that is talking to the Graph Security API to query the Palo Alto Networks data that you have in the application framework, just by enabling this integration. So it's very, very powerful. Let's have a look at an example. So I'm going to show a quick demo. We have in the top left corner, there is a sample application, just an app that we quickly built to demonstrate this capability that is communicating to the Security Graph API. So what this application does is calling the REST endpoint of the Graph Security API saying, give me the alerts. And the Graph Security API will actually broadcast this query to all the different solutions that are plugged to the Graph Security API, so through all the providers. And this information will be also sent to the Palo Alto Networks provider that will translate this request into the query language for the application framework. And the response from the application framework will be getting some firewall threat logs that were detected by the firewall, and this information was saved in the application framework. These logs will get back to the provider that will translate them in a language that the Graph Security API can understand and can reply back to the sample application. So what I'm going to show right now in the demo is an application that, again, is visualizing the security alerts without the Palo Alto Networks provider enabled. So no activation yet. You will see some alerts from Azure Security Center, Intune, et cetera, Microsoft Security Solutions. Then we will enable the provider, refresh, so same UI, same interface, same APIs. We will also see Palo Alto Networks threats from the firewall. Is it playing? Yes. So we are logging this demo application. Again, this is just a sample app, so there are no Palo Alto Networks alerts here, just Microsoft alerts. In the background, we enable the provider, we hit refresh, and now you will see that after a reload, there are some Palo Alto Networks application framework logs. So these are actual logs coming from the firewall through the application framework. And again, this is just an example application. We can do more things with that. For example, we can query AutoFocus from an existing Microsoft alert that contains a malware hash. And we can look at the AutoFocus threat intel data and see what information AutoFocus knows about this threat. We can query the application framework logs to check for additional logs in your firewall that match a specific threat that comes from Azure Security Center. So again, we are doing enrichment just by that. That will trigger a query. And this is more a future-looking thing, but we will be able also to block from this through the Security Graph API, issue a block that will actually send a block command to the application framework that will send that to the firewall. That will be not available day one, but it's something we're working on. Very simple and straightforward. Again, this application just talks to the Graph API to achieve all these things. Let me pass the presenter back to Jason for another example.
Thank you, Francesco. So let's take a look at another example. So Microsoft has an app called Power BI. It's a very data-hungry app. So we thought it'd be good to just kind of use a generic app like Power BI to show the power of pulling in data from both of these APIs together. There's a lot of instances where you want to pull in raw logs from a system like Application Framework, which is now super easy to do. And you want to pull in lots of security alerts from the Security API. And we're going to marry those two together and see what kind of insights we can come up with. So Power BI is obviously talking to the app framework and talking to the Security API at the same time, pulling them in together. And let me show you what that looks like in practice. So full disclosure, I put this together myself. So your mileage may vary on how good it is, but this is the Power BI website. I published this Power BI up to the portal. And if I can find my lovely maximize button so you can actually read it. So what are we looking at here? Basically what I've done is I've connected to the App Framework API natively and pulled in a whole bunch of threat log data and network traffic data from Palo Alto Networks. And you can see in here that we cover 1,008 users, lots of different destinations across the universe, and lots of different sources and destination IPs. And we got a nice little map that shows where all the traffic is coming to and fro. There's a lot of information here. I could scroll on this list pretty much infinitely. And when the scroll bar gets to the bottom, it just keeps on going and going and going. So as somebody who's using this app, it's cool that I have this app, this data available to me, but I don't really know what to do with it on day one. So let's look at what we did. We pulled in the Security API data. Same thing. We connected to the API, said, give me all the alerts, and it pulled them all into Power BI. And here's what we ended up with. We ended up with alerts of different severities, alerts from different products, and lots of different categories of alerts, which is pretty cool that we can do that very, very easily now with this API. But as somebody working with this application, again, where do I start? Well, let's start with the high severity things and see what we find. So if I was a security responder and I came in here, I'd see what are my high severity alerts for the day. Looks like I've got 2 of them. Let's go ahead and drill in. One of them looks like an exploit that was blocked, and one of them looks like a suspicious PowerShell script that was executed. So let's go ahead and dig further into these. So I can drill through into the alert details. Power BI makes this super easy. So this first one looks like a Windows Defender alert. Again, it says it was blocked, but it's still very concerning because obviously something ran on this machine that shouldn't have. Who was it? There was this user called Aldom. We don't know who that is, but we can also see what was run, and we can see further down here that it was run on this particular machine. And we happen to know that that machine lives in Microsoft Azure as a virtual machine. So interesting and concerning, but still don't have a tremendous amount to go on as far as what we want to do with this. Let's take a look at the next alert. This is, again, same machine. So again, that virtual machine in Azure. Same user, but very different. This time it's a PowerShell script that ran and did some strange things. Here's the actual command line that was invoked. We can see that it was actually just invoking a command to a particular IP address. That's very suspicious. We don't know anything about that IP address in Azure Security Center, apparently. But we do know that that's an odd thing to see. So let's take a look. Now, this is a company, again, we've got an Azure machine here that's protected by Azure Security Center and Windows Defender ATP, which is cool. My company's cheap, and I actually don't have anything for on-prem. So I've got no security there. But I do have Palo Alto Networks, which is awesome. And let's go ahead and search my app framework logs for this particular IP destination and see if anybody else has talked to this. So it's the same page that you saw before, only it's now filtered for that particular IP address. And lo and behold, they're all 4 users from 4 different machines, all on-prem, talking to this bad IP address. That's pretty concerning. Also concerning that this is in the UK, which I know is where my finance department lives, which is another big concern. Let's take a look at one of these users and go back and pivot again, back to the security API, and see if there's any other alerts for this user. Well, lo and behold, there is. There's an anonymous login from an IP address that we don't recognize. Now, this is an alert that we normally wouldn't pay any attention to. It's a low severity alert. Big deal. Somebody logged on from an anonymous IP address. They could have been using Tor browser, what have you. It's not something that we would traditionally triage. But now that we've been able to pivot back and forth and we see that this user in particular and their machine is definitely looks like it might be compromised, we're now concerned about an alert that we never would have looked at before. So a pretty simple scenario, but I hope it shows you that it's super easy to connect to these APIs, these very powerful APIs, pull in the data into a system like Power BI, manipulate it, and come up with some really cool insights without much work whatsoever. Oh, goodness. It didn't do that before. Apologies. I have to get through. All right. So where's the future directions? You've seen what we've released to date. In the future, we're going to be focusing on 2 main categories as partners between our companies. The first is around enabling automation scenarios. So we talked about how that looks in the security API. We are instantiating a new entity type for actions. We're going to be standardizing how that looks for all the different providers that are in the API. And what we want to do is we want to enable the Palo Alto Networks provider to provide a certain amount of automation actions, things like blocking IP addresses on firewalls. We're also, as I mentioned earlier, going to be working on a threat intel sharing. So one of the things that we're hearing from our customers very loud and clear is that they want to be able to bring their own threat intelligence to the platform. And we'll talk about in a second how that's going to look. So let's talk about the automation first. So here's a simple example of something that we may enable. So we've got traps blocking a malware execution, creating an alert. That alert shows up, sent to the application framework. And we have an application in the app framework that responds to that alert and wants to actually call the Microsoft Security API to invoke a full scan on a Windows Defender endpoint, a protected endpoint. So this kind of really cool cross-cloud collaboration can be enabled through these integrations. The threat intelligence. Like I said, what customers are asking us is to be able to take their threat intelligence that they've curated on their own, either through sophisticated harvesting, their own operations center, or through purchasing threat intelligence from third-party companies. They want that threat intelligence to be applied to all the products and services that they use. So we're going to be getting that threat intelligence into Palo Alto Networks. We're going to be getting it into Microsoft for use in all the security products. What are the key takeaways? So if there's a couple things I can leave you with from this presentation, it's that obviously Microsoft and Palo Alto Networks have a common interest in creating an open ecosystem. And we're encouraging ISVs of all sorts to participate the whole thing we're trying to do is make life easier for our customers. It's going to be easy to develop applications against either of these APIs. Choose the right API for your particular scenario, but both of them are obviously very easy to use. And lastly, the most important thing is we're trying to create a plug-and-play ecosystem for our customers. It shouldn't be the way it is today, which is I buy a license for a product and it takes me 5 months to get it deployed, and before I can actually realize the value of that purchase, because the integration into my workflows and into all my other tools is so difficult. It should be that today I'm using one product through this API, and tomorrow I decide to buy a different product, and I don't have to do any integration work at all. The APIs are the same. I stop using one, start using another, and everything just works. That's the goal, and that's what we're trying to develop together. Thank you very much.